Mr. Speaker, the other aspect of the legislation is to eliminate, for first-time home buyers, up to $1 million on purchase of a home, and I'm wondering if she could indicate whether or not the Bloc Party supports that. And again, just to reaffirm her position, does she personally support, or does the Bloc support the tax break to Canadians?
Député, vous avez 30 secondes.
The honourable member, 30 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since this morning, the Minister of Finance, for example, talked about tax relief, young people, and a plan, and so on. He's been around for years, maybe not as finance minister, but one would expect a plan after how long he's been here. When it comes to housing, we agree with the GST exemption. That helps, but it's not enough. When I went around my riding during the election campaign, young people were talking about other issues. Yeah, that's only part of the solution. Resuming debate, the honourable member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in the House to speak to Bill C-4. It's interesting because this is the beginning of a new parliament, and normally we judge a new government based on the early steps it takes, the first pieces of legislation that it introduces. And our first disappointment in looking at this government's priorities and C4 is the whole issue of a budget. This government spent the whole election campaign talking about this is a crisis, we have the solutions, and so on. But the next day, where's the plan? Where's the budget? They don't know where we're heading. They don't know what they're doing. And that's sad. It's sad to see, especially for companies in my riding, for example. There's a company that has 1,500 employees, and there's been no federal support for workers in this company that's in the steel and aluminum industry. The U.S. tariffs have doubled to 50% now. And what have the Liberals done? Well, we're negotiating. We're in discussion. That's not going to help people that are losing their jobs and people whose hours have been cut back. So it's important to speak to the Americans, but the tariff, the 25% tariff has been there for months already, and so there was no support back then, and there's still none. So there's a problem with this government. They say they're there for us, that they've got Canadians' backs, but in concrete terms, there's nothing. So what's disappointing is to see that the government's priorities are not clear at all. Now, this bill would cut income taxes for individuals. We were always a bit skeptical about that. It's not that we're against tax cuts. Obviously, I'm the first one to say that I'm happy with a tax break. But should that be the priority? Is that the first thing they should be doing? Is that going to affect our debt negatively? Is it going to affect our ability to pay for the kind of supports and services that people need? So we can't really say because there's no budget here. So they're talking about reducing the tax rate by 0.5% this year and another 0.5% next year. So the rate would go from 15% to 14.5% in 2025 and then 14% in 2026. This will help 22 million people. You have to earn $57,000 a year, $60,000, roughly speaking. So that's not the ultra-rich, but the ultra-rich will also take advantage of this because it will help them too. It's available to them as well. So it's a very expensive tax break in terms of government revenues. But it won't help people who pay very little or no tax. So this is going to cost $26 billion over 5 years. Is that the best use of taxpayer money? Well, we don't know. We don't know because there's no budget. We don't know what the situation is, the fiscal situation of the federal government. We know it's going to be very expensive. We know it's going to cost $26 billion over 5 years. We know this government's already in a deficit. So what are they going to do? Are they going to increase the deficit or cut transfers to the provinces? This is important to know because our healthcare system is struggling and there is already not getting enough in transfers. So we have to worry about funding for healthcare. But that's the question. Where is the government going to cut to offset this very expensive tax break? So the amendment that was tabled to the throne speech by the opposition, well, the Liberals are boasting about having gotten the throne speech passed, but it's a bit like the shareholders saying that, the action plan is good, and then once it's passed, then the company changes their action plan. So this is what's happening here. There's no budget, so there's no roadmap. So Mark Carney, Mr. Speaker, I'm not used to not being able to say his name because I was saying it before he became Prime Minister. But it's like the Prime Minister saying, I take note of what the House has said. It's a bit arrogant to just say, duly noted. The Prime Minister is not above Parliament. The Prime Minister is an elected official, but it's the majority of the House that gets to decide things. So the Prime Minister was elected largely to stand up to the U.S. president, who may not be a dictator, but gets pretty close to it. But the problem here is that the Prime Minister is asking for a blank check, and we don't know what he's going to do with it. So this is supposed to be a democracy, not a monarch that we're dealing with. So what the Liberals are doing here is they're fumbling around in the dark or asking us to approve things without having a budget to look at. It's a bit like getting in a taxi and the driver asking you to pay in advance, but you don't even know where you're going to be taken. So now the second part of the bill would do away with the GST on first home buyers of new homes, and we're not against that. We had suggested $750,000 be the limit. That's the only difference between the three parties here. The Liberals wanted to set the bar at $1 million, the Conservatives a little higher, and we were saying more like $750,000. So now these differences do have repercussions on the cost of the measure, but we, looking at the Quebec market where houses, obviously not everybody's buying $1 million home in Quebec. Things aren't quite as out of control price-wise. So we thought $750,000 was reasonable, but we understand that the rest of the country is not the same, the rest of Canada. But given that the context with high inflation, with high rents and high prices on homes and high interest rates, it's harder and harder for people, for first home buyers. And I was one of them not that long ago. And so it's hard for people to afford a house. There's lots of people who'd like to be able to, but who can't. So is getting rid of the GST on first-time new houses, is that going to be the solution? Well, actually, new houses are more expensive than existing houses, so that's not necessarily what first-time homebuyers are looking at buying. What would be other ways, additional ways of helping first-time homebuyers? One example would be to allow parents to draw on their RRSPs in order to help first home buyers. So the this would give first-time buyers a chance to pay back their parents